Daniel Mercer had always thought of the land his grandfather left him as a relic of his childhood, just a peaceful corner of the world that time seemed to have forgotten. It sat quietly on the outskirts of Hawthorne Ridge, a small town that had grown busier over the years, yet the old Mercer property had remained untouched. For Daniel, it was like a keepsake he could pull out of memory when life felt too fast. Long afternoons spent under the canopy of ancient oak trees, the scent of wildflowers drifting through the air, and the soft, distant hum of cicadas, all woven into the fabric of his early years. But life happened. College, a career in marketing that took him to the city, and relationships that demanded more of him than he often had to give. The land became something of a myth, a story he told himself when he needed comfort but rarely revisited. And so it lay dormant for years, quietly existing in legal documents and in the recesses of his mind. Nothing could have prepared Daniel for the gut punch of betrayal that would come one lazy Saturday morning. He was lying on his couch, phone in one hand and a cold cup of coffee in the other, scrolling mindlessly through his feed. That's when he saw it. A featured article about a stunning new estate in Hawthorne Ridge, the kind of clickbait headline he usually ignored. But something made him pause. Maybe it was the name of the neighborhood. Maybe it was fate. Either way, he clicked, and then the blood drained from his face. The photos showed a sprawling mansion, gleaming white against a backdrop of towering oaks. The write-up was nauseating, full of praise for the visionary behind the project, a woman named Victoria Langford. She was credited with transforming an unused lot into a modern masterpiece, hailed as the pride of the community. Daniel's eyes zeroed in on one picture in particular. The house itself was extravagant, yes, but it was the tree in the foreground that made his breath catch in his throat. It was old, gnarled, its branches twisted into the sky like a plea or a warning. It was the same tree he had climbed as a boy, the one his grandfather had built a wooden swing on, the one that had stood for longer than anyone in his family could remember. And it was standing in front of a house that wasn't supposed to be there. He sat up so fast his coffee sloshed over the rim and soaked into his sweatpants. But he barely noticed. His mind reeled as he flicked through the photos. The hills, the tree line, even the fence posts at the edge of the property. He knew them as well as he knew the lines on his own hand. There was no mistake. Victoria Langford's visionary project was sitting on his grandfather's land. Daniel stumbled to his desk, pulling open drawers, rifling through papers until he found the manila folder that held the property deed. It was still there. His name was printed clearly, as it had been for over a decade. There was no record of a sale, no transfer, no permis chingrantith, nothing to suggest why there was now a mansion standing on land that, by all rights, was still his. His hand shook as he pressed the papers flat on his desk. He let out a bitter laugh, though there was nothing funny about any of it. This had to be a mistake, some kind of bureaucratic screw-up, but deep down, he already knew that wasn't the case. Nobody builds a multi-million-dollar home by accident on land they don't own. This wasn't an error. It was theft, and Daniel Mercer wasn't going to let it stand. By the time he drove out to Hawthorne Ridge, his knuckles were bone white against the steering wheel. The road twisted through familiar countryside, but nothing felt the same. The land where he'd spent summers running barefoot through fields had been transformed beyond recognition. Where there had once been wild grass and a humble dirt driveway, there was now a manicured lawn that rolled out like a green carpet. A wrought iron gate gleamed in the sunlight, flanked by brick pillars topped with security cameras. The mansion beyond it was a monument to arrogance. It was massive, sleek lines, high windows, and stonework that probably cost more than he earned in a year. It didn't belong here, and neither did the woman who had claimed it. Daniel pulled to a stop just outside the gate. His heartbeat thundered in his ears as he stepped out of the car and approached the intercom. He jabbed the button harder than necessary. After a moment, static crackled, followed by a clipped, irritated female voice. "Yes. Who is this?" Daniel took a breath, willing his anger to stay just below the surface. "This is Daniel Mercer. I own this land. I need to speak to whoever is living here." There was a long pause. When the voice came back, it was colder. Mr. Mercer, this property is under the jurisdiction of the Hawthorne Ridge Homeowners Association. I'm Victoria Langford, HOA president and homeowner. If you have concerns, you'll need to go through the proper channels. Daniel's jaw tightened. There are no channels. This land was never part of any HOA, and it damn sure wasn't yours to build on. I have the deed in my hand. Another pause. This time, it felt calculated. Then came a soft, dismissive laugh. I don't appreciate baseless accusations, Mr. Mercer. This home was built with full approval. If you feel there's been a misunderstanding, you're welcome to contact the HOA office. The intercom clicked off. Daniel stood there, staring at the silent gate. His fists clenched at his sides. The audacity was staggering. She had stolen his land, built her palace on it, and was now acting like he was the problem. But if Victoria thought he was going to slink away quietly, she was about to be very disappointed. He wasn't backing down. She had picked the wrong man to cross. That night, Daniel didn't sleep. He sat at his kitchen table, surrounded by property records, zoning maps, and legal articles he barely understood. His laptop glowed in the dim light, tabs open to real estate laws and case studies on land disputes. His grandfather's deed lay at the center of it all, the irrefutable proof that the land was his. Victoria Langford had forged something. He was sure of it. The next morning, he drove to the county records office. The place hadn't changed since he was a teenager filing the deed transfer after his grandfather passed. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as he approached the front desk. The clerk, a tired-looking man in his 60s, barely glanced at him. I need all records on parcel 742, the Mercer property, Daniel said, sliding the deed across the counter. The man sighed, typing sluggishly into the computer. After a moment, his brow furrowed. Looks like there was an annexation 3 years ago. Your lot was added to the HOA's jurisdiction. Daniel's stomach twisted. That's impossible. I never agreed to that. Well, the clerk shrugged. There's a signed document on file. Pull it up, Daniel demanded. It took agonizing seconds before the document appeared on the screen. Daniel leaned in. His name was typed neatly at the bottom. Next to it was a signature that was supposed to be his. But it wasn't. He knew the moment he saw it. Close but wrong. The loops were off. The pressure was inconsistent. Somebody had forged his signature. Daniel's pulse pounded in his ears. That's a forgery, he said through gritted teeth. The clerk raised an eyebrow. You need to take it up with the HOA. Oh, I will, Daniel promised. Within an hour, he was sitting in the office of Lisa Caldwell, a real estate attorney known for eating HOA presidents alive. She examined the documents with an expression of mild disgust. This is sloppy, Lisa said, tapping the forged signature. But it's enough to get them in trouble. We can challenge the annexation, nullify it. And once we do, the house is an illegal structure. Daniel exhaled. So I can take it back? Lisa smiled faintly. Legally, yes. Morally? Well, that's your call. He didn't hesitate. Victoria Langford had crossed a line. She deserved everything coming her way. Over the following days, Daniel and Lisa dug deep. They found evidence of forged documents, misuse of HOA funds, and a long trail of complaints against Victoria. Residents of Hawthorne Ridge were eager to talk once they knew someone was standing up to her. Frank Doyle, a retired Marine, shared stories of outrageous fines for things like hanging wind chimes. Elena Santos, a single mother, showed Daniel a letter where Victoria threatened foreclosure over unpaid HOA dues that mysteriously increased overnight. Victoria wasn't just corrupt. She was cruel, and Daniel was going to end her reign. He compiled every piece of evidence, sending it to local news outlets, real estate watchdogs, and social media groups. He met with HOA board members privately, showing them proof of Victoria's fraud. Fear turned to outrage. Outrage turned to action. An emergency HOA meeting was called. Daniel stood at the back as Victoria tried to spin the narrative, but the room was no longer hers. He stepped forward, holding up the forged annexation document. This signature isn't mine. It's a crime. And Victoria Langford committed it. Gasps. Murmurs. Demands for her resignation. And then he played the recording, Victoria's voice assuring a contractor the paperwork wasn't finalized but wouldn't be an issue. Her empire crumbled that night. The lawsuit was swift. The court declared the annexation invalid. The mansion was an illegal structure. Victoria was charged with fraud, misappropriation of funds, and ordered to vacate. 30 days later, Daniel stood under his grandfather's oak tree, watching demolition crews reduce Victoria's dream home to rubble. Justice. In the months that followed, Daniel restored the land. He planted gardens, built a small cabin. He made it his own again. And one day, a letter arrived. I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted to say I'm sorry. You were right to fight. I hope you find peace on that land. It was signed Victoria Langford. Daniel folded the letter and set it aside. For the first time in years, his grandfather's land was whole again. And so was he.